The manila folder trembled in my hands as I sat across from Rebecca Martinez, the branch manager at First National Bank. Her eyes held something I couldn't quite read. Sympathy, maybe? Or was it pity? After 17 years of rental applications, credit denials, and loan rejections, I'd learned to recognize that look. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice softer than I expected, there's something we need to discuss about your grandmother's estate. I shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair, the same one I'd sat in 3 months earlier when they'd turned down my mortgage application for the 4th time. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was again, in the very place that had crushed my homeownership dreams, discussing the woman who'd raised me after my parents died in that car accident when I was 12. What happened next would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and the invisible forces that had been working against me for nearly 2 decades. The rejection letters started when I was 22. Fresh out of college with a business degree and enough optimism to believe that hard work guaranteed success. My first apartment application in downtown Portland was denied within hours. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, called me personally. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she said, her voice genuinely apologetic. "Your references are excellent and your credit score isn't terrible. But there's something in your background check that's concerning." "What kind of something?" I pressed, but she wouldn't elaborate. Privacy laws, she claimed, company policy. The pattern repeated itself with disturbing consistency. Apartment after apartment, job after job, always the same vague explanations. Credit irregularities, background concerns, financial red flags. Nobody could tell me exactly what these issues were, just that they existed, like phantom barriers blocking every path I tried to take. I lived in a string of month-to-month rentals in increasingly rough neighborhoods, places where landlords didn't run credit checks because they couldn't be picky. The walls were thin, the heating inconsistent, and the locks were more for show than security. But they were all I could get. My career suffered the same mysterious obstacles. Despite graduating summa cum laude with a degree in business administration, the corporate world seemed allergic to hiring me for anything beyond entry-level positions. I'd make it through multiple interview rounds, impress everyone I met, then receive the inevitable email, "We've decided to go with another candidate." By 25, I was working as a night shift supervisor at a warehouse in Southeast Portland, making just enough to cover rent, utilities, and ramen noodles. My college friends were buying their first homes, starting families, building the American dream, while I watched from the sidelines, wondering what fundamental flaw made me unworthy of the same opportunities. The breaking point came when I applied for a small business loan to start a consulting firm. I'd saved $8,000, a fortune by my standards, and had a solid business plan. The loan officer, a thin man named Gerald Hutchins, reviewed my application with increasing bewilderment. "This is strange," he muttered, pecking at his keyboard. "Your personal finances show consistent employment, no major debts, decent savings relative to your income, but there's this notation." "What kind of notation?" He squinted at his screen, then shook his head. "I can't discuss the specifics, but there's a flag on your social security number that's been there for, well, it looks like it was placed when you were still a minor. That's unusual." The loan was denied, of course, but Gerald's comment hunted me. A flag placed when I was a minor? The only significant event from my childhood was my parents' death and moving in with my grandmother, Dorothy Thompson, in her small house on Maple Street. Grandma Dorothy was a mystery wrapped in kindness. She'd taken me in without question, raised me with firm love, and somehow managed to pay for my college education on her modest pension. When I asked about money, she'd wave dismissively and say, "Don't worry about old Dorothy. I've got more than I need." Her house was small, but well-maintained, filled with antique furniture and photographs spanning decades. The basement was off limits. She claimed it flooded every winter, though I never saw evidence of water damage. Sometimes I'd catch her on the phone late at night, speaking in hushed tones about the boy and keeping him safe. I assumed she was talking about me, but the conversations always stopped when I entered the room. She died on a Tuesday morning in March, peacefully in her sleep at 87. I found her sitting in her favorite armchair, a cup of coffee still warm on the side table, as if she had simply decided to rest her eyes and slipped away.
The funeral was small, just me, a few neighbors, and Father Rodriguez from St. Michael's Catholic Church.
I expected to inherit the house, small as it was. It represented the only stability I'd ever known, the one place where I'd felt truly at home. But the estate attorney, a stern woman named Patricia Valdez, delivered news that shouldn't have surprised me by then. "I'm afraid there are complications," she explained in her downtown office. "Your grandmother's estate has certain encumbrances. The house will need to be sold to settle outstanding debts." "What debts?" She lived simply, never bought anything she couldn't afford. "Legal fees, primarily, from a lawsuit that was settled years ago. The terms are confidential, but the estate is responsible for ongoing payments." Another dead end, another door slammed shut. I helped arrange the estate sale, watching strangers pick through Dorothy's belongings like vultures. Her antique dining set went to a dealer from Beaverton. Her jewelry, what little there was, got bought by a woman who haggled over the price of my grandmother's wedding ring. The house sold within a week to cash buyers, a young couple from California with tech money. They planned to tear it down and build something modern, erasing the last physical connection to the woman who'd saved my life. I moved into a studio apartment above a Vietnamese restaurant, the smell of pho permanently embedded in the walls. It was smaller than my childhood bedroom, but it was what I could afford on my warehouse salary. At night, lying on a mattress that squeaked with every movement, I'd stare at the water stains on the ceiling and wonder what cosmic joke had made me the universe's punching bag. The thoughts grew darker as months passed. What was the point of trying anymore? Every door led to rejection. Every dream crumbled into disappointment. I began to understand why some people just gave up, why they stopped fighting against forces too big and invisible to defeat. Then, 3 months after the funeral, I received a certified letter from First National Bank, Dorothy's bank, though I didn't remember her ever mentioning them. The letter was brief and formal. "Please contact our office regarding Dorothy Thompson's estate. Important matters require your immediate attention." I almost threw it away. Another bill, probably, or some paperwork the attorney had overlooked. But something made me call, maybe the same stubborn streak that had kept me applying for apartments and jobs, despite the constant rejections. That's how I ended up sitting across from Rebecca Martinez, watching her open a manila folder that would change everything I thought I knew about my life, my grandmother, and the invisible forces that had shaped my entire adult existence. Rebecca Martinez opened the manila folder with deliberate care, as if the contents might explode if handled roughly. Her manicured fingers traced the edge of the first document before she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Mr. Thompson, before we begin, I need to ask you something. Did your grandmother ever mention the name Blackstone Industries?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Images flashed through my mind. Late-night phone calls, hushed conversations, Dorothy's face going pale whenever certain topics came up on the news. Corporate lawsuits, environmental disasters, class action settlements. "Maybe," I said carefully. "Why?" She pulled out a legal document, its pages yellowed with age and dense with legal terminology. The header read, "Confidential Settlement Agreement," and was dated 18 years ago. Just a few months after my parents died. "Your grandmother was part of a class action lawsuit against Blackstone Industries. They manufactured chemical components for industrial applications, and their facility in Gresham had been illegally dumping toxic waste into the groundwater for over 20 years. My mouth went dry. Gresham is where my parents lived, where I'd spent the first 12 years of my life drinking tap water, swimming in local creeks, playing in soil that was apparently contaminated with industrial poison. "The lawsuit was massive," Rebecca continued, her voice taking on the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news. "Over 3,000 families were affected. Cancer clusters, birth defects, neurological disorders. Your parents—" She didn't need to finish. "The car accident that killed them was caused by my father suffering a sudden seizure while driving. The doctors never found a medical explanation for why a healthy 34-year-old man would have such a severe neurological event. Blackstone settled for $800 million.
Your grandmother, as your legal guardian, received a substantial settlement on your behalf, but there were conditions. The folder contained page after page of legal documents, bank statements, and correspondence between Dorothy and various attorneys. The numbers were staggering. My settlement was $2.3 million, placed in a trust fund with very specific restrictions. The primary condition, she explained, was absolute confidentiality. Blackstone's legal team was particularly concerned about younger victims becoming public advocates against the company as they reached adulthood. They structured the settlements to prevent that. She showed me a document that made my blood run cold. It was a comprehensive agreement that Dorothy had signed on my behalf, accepting the settlement money in exchange for my permanent silence about the case. But the restrictions went far beyond just not talking to the media.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The agreement included what they called lifestyle limitations, Rebecca said, her voice growing quieter. Blackstone's legal team argued that significant wealth at a young age might make you a public figure, potentially drawing attention to the case. So they implemented a system designed to keep you ordinary. The folder contained correspondence between Blackstone's lawyers and various credit agencies, background check companies, and financial institutions. They had systematically flagged my social security number with false information designed to make me appear as a financial risk. Not enough to destroy my life completely, but sufficient to ensure I'd never achieve the kind of success that might put me in the public eye. Every rejection letter, every denied application, every closed door had been orchestrated by a corporation protecting itself from a 12-year-old boy who might grow up to seek justice. But here's where it gets complicated, Rebecca said, pulling out another set of documents. Your grandmother was smarter than Blackstone's lawyers realized. She agreed to their terms, but she also made some very specific investments with your settlement money. The trust fund hadn't just been sitting in a bank account collecting interest. Dorothy had used her power as trustee to purchase real estate, stocks, and other assets. Over 18 years, the $2.3 million had grown to over $12 million. More importantly, she continued, she found loopholes in the confidentiality agreement. The restrictions were designed to last until your 30th birthday, with the assumption that by then, the case would be old news and you'd be too established in life to rock the boat. What they didn't anticipate was your grandmother's creative interpretation of the contract. Dorothy had structured the trust so that ownership of various properties would transfer to me automatically on specific dates, regardless of the confidentiality restrictions. The lawyers had focused on preventing me from accessing liquid assets that might make me wealthy enough to hire attorneys or fund activism. They hadn't considered real estate transfers carefully enough. 3 months ago, on your 28th birthday, you became the owner of 17 properties across Oregon and Washington. Your grandmother timed it perfectly. The confidentiality agreement expires in 2 years, but the property transfers were legal under the original settlement terms. She spread out a series of deeds and property documents across the desk. Houses in Portland, Seattle, and Spokane, commercial properties in downtown districts, a small apartment complex in Eugene, even the house where Dorothy had raised me. She'd bought it back from the estate buyers using trust funds just days before she died. The current market value of your real estate portfolio is approximately $8.4 million. The remaining liquid assets in the trust will become available to you when you turn 30, along with the freedom to discuss the Blackstone case publicly if you choose. I thought about Dorothy in her simple house, clipping coupons and shopping at thrift stores while secretly managing a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Why didn't she live differently? I asked. She could have afforded anything she wanted. Janet's expression grew thoughtful. She said the money was never meant for her. Every dollar she spent on herself was a dollar that wouldn't be available for your future. But more than that, she believed that living modestly was the best way to protect both of you. Blackstone was watching for signs of sudden wealth. She pulled out a folder marked Confidential, Personal Notes, and opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters from Dorothy, documenting her strategy and her emotional struggles with keeping me in the dark. One letter, dated just 2 years ago, read, "Marcus applied for another apartment today and was rejected again. I watched him try to hide his disappointment when he called to tell me. Part of me wants to end this charade, to tell him the truth and let him live in comfort. But we're so close to the finish line. 2 more years and he'll have both the resources and the legal freedom to build whatever life he chooses." Another letter described her research into Blackstone Industries' current financial situation. The company had grown substantially since the original lawsuit, expanding into renewable energy and government contracts. Their stock price had tripled in the past 5 years. She kept detailed records of Blackstone's activities, Janet said. She believed that when the confidentiality restrictions expired, you might choose to seek additional justice. She wanted you to have all the information necessary to make that decision. The folder contained newspaper clippings about other Blackstone lawsuits, financial reports showing the company's profit margins, and even photographs of Blackstone's executives at charity galas and corporate events. Dorothy had been conducting her own investigation for 18 years. "There's something else," Janet said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She pulled out a sealed envelope similar to the one Rebecca Martinez had shown me at the bank. "Your grandmother left this with instructions that it should only be opened if you decide to challenge Blackstone directly." I held the envelope, feeling its weight. Whatever was inside represented Dorothy's final gambit, the ultimate evidence she'd gathered during nearly 2 decades of patient investigation. "The other envelope from the bank. Do you know what's in that one?" Janet shook her head. "Dorothy kept some secrets even from me. But she did say that together, the 2 envelopes contained everything you'd need to make Blackstone Industries wish they had never heard the name Thompson." As I left Janet's office, my phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown, but I answered anyway. "Marcus Thompson?" The voice was male, professional, with a slight southern accent. "Yes? My name is Richard Sterling. I'm partner at Sterling Hayes and Associates in Seattle. We specialize in corporate litigation, particularly cases involving environmental crimes and corporate cover-ups." My blood turned cold. "I didn't call any lawyers." "No, but your grandmother did, about 6 months before she passed away. She retained our services with very specific instructions about when to contact you. She said there would come a time when you'd need attorneys who weren't afraid of taking on major corporations." The timing was perfect, as everything Dorothy had planned seemed to be. Just as I was discovering the scope of my inheritance and the evidence she'd gathered, lawyers appeared ready to help me use both. "Mr. Thompson, your grandmother paid our retainer fee in advance. We've been preparing for this moment for months. If you're ready to hear what she discovered about Blackstone Industries' ongoing activities, I think you're going to find our conversation very interesting." I stood on the sidewalk outside Janet's office, holding a briefcase full of property deeds and a phone connected to lawyers my dead grandmother had hired to wage war against a multinational corporation. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't the one being rejected or turned away. I was the one with power, with resources, with options. The question was, what was I going to do with them? Richard Sterling's law office occupied the entire 42nd floor of a Seattle skyscraper, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Elliott Bay. My Honda Civic, looking pathetically out of place in a parking garage filled with BMWs and Teslas. Sterling himself was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of sharp suit and confident bearing that suggested he was accustomed to winning.
His handshake was firm, his office immaculate, and his reputation, according to my hasty internet research, was built on destroying corporations that thought they were untouchable. "Your grandmother was remarkable," he said, gesturing for me to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "In 30 years of practice, I've never encountered someone who documented corporate malfeasance so thoroughly while maintaining perfect operational security."
He opened a file cabinet and withdrew a box marked Thompson, Blackstone Investigation. The box was thick, heavy, and secured with multiple locks. Dorothy spent 18 years collecting evidence of Blackstone's ongoing criminal activities. What started as protective research for your case evolved into something much larger. She discovered that the Gresham facility was just the beginning. Sterling spread documents across a conference table. Internal Blackstone memos, financial records, environmental impact reports, and correspondence between company executives. The picture that emerged was of a corporation that had learned nothing from the original lawsuit. After settling the Gresham case, Blackstone simply moved their illegal dumping operations, Sterling explained. They opened facilities in rural Montana, West Virginia, and southern Texas, areas with less environmental oversight and populations too poor to fight back effectively. The evidence was damning. Internal emails showed executives joking about finding new places to hide our mistakes. Financial documents revealed that Blackstone had budgeted for environmental fines as a cost of doing business. Most shocking were the health studies the company had commissioned and then buried when the results proved inconvenient. Your grandmother somehow obtained access to Blackstone's internal database, Sterling said. We're not sure how. She was very secretive about her methods, but she downloaded thousands of files over several years. I thought about Dorothy's late-night computer sessions, which I'd assumed were online shopping or email. She'd actually been conducting corporate espionage from her kitchen table, systematically building a case that could destroy one of America's largest industrial companies. The scope of which she uncovered is unprecedented, Sterling continued. Blackstone has poisoned groundwater in 12 states, falsified safety reports to government agencies, and systematically covered up health studies linking their chemicals to birth defects and neurological disorders. He showed me medical records from rural communities near Blackstone facilities. Cancer rates triple the national average. Children born with developmental disabilities. Entire towns where the life expectancy was 15 years below the state average. Your grandmother cross-referenced these health statistics with Blackstone's facility locations and operating schedules. The correlation is undeniable. They're systematically poisoning communities that can't fight back. But Dorothy's investigation had gone beyond documenting environmental crimes. She'd uncovered a network of corruption that reached into state governments, regulatory agencies, and federal oversight committees. Blackstone has been bribing officials for decades, Sterling explained, showing me banking records and email chains. They have governors, senators, and EPA administrators on their payroll. When communities try to sue, key evidence mysteriously disappears from government databases. The most disturbing discovery was Blackstone's reputation management program. The same system they'd used to sabotage my life had been deployed against hundreds of potential whistleblowers, environmental activists, and attorneys who threaten their operations. They maintain a database of problem individuals, Sterling said, his voice tight with anger. Scientists who've published papers about chemical contamination, journalists who've investigated environmental crimes, attorneys who've sued chemical companies. All of them have been systematically sabotaged using the same methods they used against you. I stared at spreadsheets showing names, addresses, and detailed profiles of people whose lives had been quietly destroyed to protect Blackstone's profits. Teachers denied tenure because of fabricated background flags. Doctors whose medical licenses were challenged based on false complaints. Activists whose credit had been ruined to prevent them from funding their causes. Your case wasn't personal, Sterling explained. You were just one name on a very long list. But your grandmother turned that into an advantage.
While they were focused on keeping you ordinary, she was building the resources to fight back on behalf of everyone they'd hurt. Dorothy's master plan was more ambitious than I had imagined. She hadn't just been protecting me or seeking justice for our family, she'd been preparing to wage war against an entire system of corporate corruption. She wanted you to have a choice when you turned 30. You could take your inheritance, live comfortably, and never look back, or you could use your resources to expose Blackstone's crimes and seek justice for thousands of victims. He handed me a legal document titled Thompson v. Blackstone Industries Environmental Crimes Class Action. The lawsuit was already drafted, waiting only for my signature to be filed in federal court. If you choose to proceed, this won't be a typical settlement case. Blackstone will fight with everything they have. They'll try to discredit you, intimidate witnesses, and corrupt the legal process. But your grandmother's evidence is so comprehensive that we believe we can win not just damages, but criminal prosecutions.
The potential financial recovery was staggering. Sterling estimated that a successful class action could result in damages exceeding $10 billion, with criminal penalties that could destroy the company entirely. More importantly, he said, criminal convictions would mean prison time for Blackstone's executives. Your grandmother documented specific knowledge of environmental crimes by the CEO, CFO, and head of operations. They personally approved decisions that they knew would poison communities. I thought about the executives I'd seen in Dorothy's photographs. Wealthy, powerful people attending charity galas while their company systematically murdered poor communities. The contrast with my own struggles, the years of rejections and failures orchestrated by their legal team, made my anger burn white hot. "There's something else," Sterling said, reaching into the box one more time. He pulled out a video recording device and a stack of DVDs. "Your grandmother managed to record several meetings with Blackstone's attorneys over the years. They thought she was just a confused old woman managing her grandson's trust fund. They said things they never should have said." He inserted one of the DVDs into a player, and Dorothy's voice filled the room. She was in a conference room with 3 men in expensive suits discussing the management of my situation. "The boy continues to be problematic. His applications are becoming more sophisticated, and he's starting to ask questions about the background flags. Increase the restrictions. Make sure he can't get any position that might give him a platform or resources. Keep him desperate and isolated." Dorothy's voice, carefully modulated to sound frail and confused. "I just want to make sure Marcus is safe. You said these measures were for his protection." "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. Everything we're doing is in his best interest. A young man with his background needs careful guidance." Sterling paused the recording. She recorded over 40 hours of meetings with Blackstone attorneys. They admitted to criminal conspiracy, fraud, and systematic rights violations. They thought she was just a harmless old lady who'd never understand the legal implications of what they were saying. The evidence Dorothy had gathered wasn't just comprehensive, it was devastating. She documented crimes, recorded confessions, and built an airtight case for destroying one of America's most powerful corporations. "The choice is yours, Marcus, but I want you to understand what's at stake. If we proceed, we're not just seeking justice for you or your family. We're fighting for thousands of people who've been poisoned, impoverished, and silenced by corporate power." I sat in that glass tower, looking out at the Seattle skyline, holding evidence that could topple an empire. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being controlled or manipulated. I was the one with power. The question was whether I had the courage to use it. I spent 3 sleepless nights staring at the ceiling of my studio apartment, the sealed envelopes from Dorothy sitting unopened on my kitchen table like unexploded bombs. Sterling had given me a week to decide whether to file the lawsuit. The weight of that choice pressed down on me with suffocating intensity. On Thursday morning, I drove to the house where Dorothy had raised me.
The new owners had already started demolition, tearing down the back porch where she'd taught me to play chess. Workers in hard hats moved through the rooms where I'd done homework, celebrated birthdays, and grieved the loss of my parents. I parked across the street and called the one person whose opinion might help me navigate this impossible decision, Father Rodriguez, the priest who'd conducted Dorothy's funeral. Marcus. His warm voice carried the slight accent of his El Salvador childhood. I was wondering when you might call. Your grandmother mentioned you'd be facing some difficult choices soon. We met at a small cafe near St. Michael's, the kind of place where coffee was served in thick ceramic mugs and the waitresses knew everyone's name. Father Rodriguez looked older than I remembered, his hair more silver, his face lined with the weight of carrying other people's burdens. Dorothy came to see me every month for the past 2 years, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. She was struggling with what she'd kept hidden from you. The guilt was eating at her. She could have told me. I would have understood. Would you have? His dark eyes searched my face. A teenager being told that powerful people wanted to control his life, that his struggles weren't his fault but the result of corporate manipulation? Dorothy worried that knowledge would consume you with anger or make you reckless. He pulled out a small notebook, its pages worn from frequent handling. She asked me to give this to you if you ever came seeking guidance about what to do with her evidence. The notebook contained Dorothy's private thoughts about justice, revenge, and moral responsibility. Her handwriting grew shakier in the later entries, but her thinking remained sharp. I dream about the children in those poisoned communities, one entry read. Their parents don't know why their babies are sick, why their wells run brown, why cancer takes their neighbors at 40. I have evidence that could save them, but using it means destroying Marcus's chance at a normal life. Another entry, dated just months before her death. I've been selfish, keeping this knowledge to protect my own grandson while other grandmothers bury children killed by the same poisons that murdered his parents. If Marcus chooses not to fight, I'll understand, but if he has even half the courage I've seen in him, he'll realize that justice delayed is justice denied. She was torn, Father Rodriguez explained, between protecting you and protecting strangers, between seeking justice and seeking peace. She hoped you'd be stronger than she was. I left the cafe with more questions than answers, but driving through Portland's neighborhoods, I began to see things differently. Every park where children played, every school where families sent their kids, every community garden where people grew food, all of it was vulnerable to corporate poisoning if companies like Blackstone could operate without consequences. That evening, I finally opened the first sealed envelope, the one Rebecca Martinez had given me at the bank. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. Marcus, this contains everything you need to understand what Blackstone stole from our family. Your father's medical records, the real cause of the seizure that killed him, and the company's internal knowledge that their chemicals cause neurological damage. They knew and they hid it. Dorothy. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop with trembling hands. The files were meticulously organized: medical studies, internal Blackstone memos, and communications between company scientists and executives. The picture that emerged was of a corporation that had known for decades that their chemicals caused seizures, birth defects, and cancer. Most devastating was an internal memo dated 6 months before my father's death. Blackstone's chief scientist had recommended immediately alerting communities near the Gresham facility about neurological risks from groundwater contamination. The CEO's response was filed right below it. Absolutely not. Legal says notification would imply liability. Continue monitoring, but take no action that suggests corporate knowledge of health risks. They had known my father was in danger. They could have saved him with a simple warning about contaminated water. Instead, they chose to protect their profits and let families like mine pay the price in blood. The second envelope from Sterling's office contained even more damning evidence. Blackstone had continued their cover-up operations after the original settlement, expanding their network of corrupted officials and sabotaged victims. The files included current operations in communities across America, places where children were drinking poisoned water while their parents remained ignorant of the danger. Among the documents was a current list of monitored individuals,
people Blackstone considered threats to their operations. Environmental scientists studying cancer clusters, journalists investigating chemical contamination, attorneys representing poisoned communities. All of them were being systematically sabotaged using the same methods that had destroyed my opportunities. One name on the list stopped me cold. Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric oncologist in Montana who'd published studies linking childhood leukemia to industrial chemical exposure. According to Blackstone's files, they had her research funding cut, her medical license challenged, and her mortgage application denied. She was currently facing foreclosure on her home while caring for her disabled daughter alone. Another entry detailed the case of Miguel Santos, a high school science teacher in Texas who tested their community's well water and discovered illegal contamination levels. Blackstone had arranged for him to be fired from his teaching position and blacklisted from other school districts. He was now working 3 part-time jobs to support his family while trying to warn his neighbors about poisoned groundwater. The list went on. Hundreds of people whose lives had been quietly destroyed for the crime of threatening Blackstone's profits. People who'd lost jobs, homes, and reputations for trying to protect their communities from corporate poisoning. I thought about my own years of rejection and failure, the constant struggle to understand why opportunity seemed always just out of reach. At least I had Dorothy's secret protection and inheritance. These people faced Blackstone's sabotage alone, without resources or hope. My phone buzzed with a text from Sterling. Blackstone's legal team has learned about your meeting with our firm. They're preparing a preemptive response. If you're going to file, we need to move quickly. I walked out onto the fire escape of my apartment building, looking over the city lights of Portland. Somewhere out there, in communities I'd never visited, families were drinking poisoned water. Children were developing cancer because corporate executives prioritized stock prices over human lives. Scientists and teachers and journalists were having their lives destroyed for trying to speak the truth. Dorothy had given me a choice, but looking at the evidence she'd gathered, I realized it wasn't really a choice at all. It was a responsibility. I called Sterling's number. Richard, it's Marcus Thompson. I've made my decision.
And I thought about my father's seizure, about the children in those poisoned communities, about Dr. Chen facing foreclosure for trying to save lives. Filed a lawsuit. All of it. Criminal charges, civil damages, everything. It's time to make Blackstone Industries pay for what they've done. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, I'll have the papers ready for filing first thing Monday morning. Marcus, you should know, once we file, there's no going back. They're going to come after you with everything they have. Let them come, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. I'm not the scared kid they've been controlling anymore. I'm a property owner with resources, evidence, and the best legal team money can buy. It's time they learned what happens when you steal someone's life. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't afraid of rejection or failure. I was the one who would be doing the rejecting Blackstone's attempts to silence victims, rejecting corporate impunity, rejecting a system that allowed the powerful to poison the powerless without consequences. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. The Blackstone Industries building in downtown Seattle was 43 stories of steel and glass, a monument to corporate power that cast shadows over the surrounding blocks. I stood across the street at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, watching executives in expensive suits hurry through the revolving doors, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse. In my briefcase were copies of the federal lawsuit that Sterling had filed 3 hours earlier. Thompson versus Blackstone Industries, a case that would reshape corporate accountability in America. My phone rang immediately. News traveled fast in corporate circles. Mr. Thompson? The voice was crisp, authoritative, with the kind of confidence that came from never losing. This is Victoria Hayes, Chief Legal Counsel for Blackstone Industries. I believe we should talk. There's nothing to discuss. You had 18 years to do the right thing. I think you're making a mistake that will cost you dearly. Lawsuits are expensive, time-consuming, and often unsuccessful. We'd like to offer you a generous settlement to resolve this matter quietly. I almost laughed. How generous? $50 million, tax-free, in exchange for dropping all claims and maintaining confidentiality about this conversation. $50 million. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. The safe choice, the smart choice, the choice that would let me disappear into comfortable anonymity while Blackstone continued poisoning communities across America. Miss Hayes, I need you to understand something. I'm not the scared kid you've been controlling for the past 18 years. I know about Montana. I know about West Virginia. I know about the families your company has murdered while your executives collect bonuses. Silence on the other end of the line. I continued. Counter-offer. Blackstone Industries shuts down all operations involving toxic waste, pays full medical expenses for every family you've poisoned, and your executives plead guilty to environmental crimes. In exchange, I'll ask the court to show mercy during sentencing. The line went dead. Within hours, Blackstone's response machine kicked into high gear. News outlets that received advertising revenue from chemical companies published articles questioning my credibility. Social media accounts with suspicious profiles started spreading rumors about my mental health and financial motives. Private investigators started following me, documenting my daily activities. But Dorothy had prepared me for this too. Sterling's firm had anticipated every move in Blackstone's playbook. They're following the standard corporate defense strategy, Sterling explained during an emergency meeting. Discredit the plaintiff, delay the proceedings, and exhaust our resources. But they're making a crucial mistake. They're fighting the last war. 18 years of technological advancement had worked in our favor. Dorothy's evidence was stored on multiple encrypted servers, backed up in locations across 3 countries. The recordings she'd made were digitally authenticated using blockchain technology. Blackstone couldn't make the evidence disappear like they had in the 1990s. More importantly, Sterling had assembled a legal team that specialized in destroying corporations. Environmental law experts, forensic accountants, former federal prosecutors, and investigative journalists working as legal consultants. We weren't just filing a lawsuit. We were conducting a comprehensive investigation into decades of corporate crimes. The first breakthrough came within a week. Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatric oncologist from Montana who'd been blacklisted by Blackstone, agreed to serve as our lead expert witness. Her research had documented cancer clusters in 17 communities near Blackstone facilities, research that had been suppressed through coordinated attacks on her career.
I've been waiting for this moment for 8 years, she told me during a video call from her small apartment. They destroyed my career because I wouldn't stay quiet about dying children. Now we can make them pay. Other victims began coming forward. Miguel Santos, the science teacher from Texas, provided additional evidence of groundwater contamination. Families from rural communities shared medical records documenting birth defects and neurological disorders. Environmental scientists offered testimony about Blackstone's falsified safety reports. Within 6 months, our single lawsuit had grown into a massive class action representing over 12,000 victims across 14 states. The federal judge assigned to the case, the Honorable Patricia Williams, had a reputation for refusing to be intimidated by corporate pressure. Blackstone's legal strategy grew increasingly desperate. They challenged the admissibility of Dorothy's evidence, claiming it had been obtained illegally. They sued Sterling's firm for harassment. They even tried to have me declared mentally incompetent, arguing that my years of rejection and failure proved I was unstable. Every attack failed. Dorothy's evidence had been meticulously documented and legally obtained. Sterling's investigation followed all proper procedures. And my mental competency evaluation, conducted by court-appointed psychiatrists, concluded that I was remarkably resilient given the systematic psychological warfare he endured. The turning point came during depositions. Blackstone's current CEO, James Morrison, was forced to testify under oath about his company's environmental practices. Sterling had prepared for months, studying Morrison's background, his communications, and his knowledge of ongoing contamination.
Mr. Morrison, Sterling began, are you familiar with the groundwater contamination at your West Virginia facility? I'm aware of some environmental concerns that we're addressing through proper channels. Sterling displayed an internal memo on the courtroom screen. This is an email you sent 3 months ago to your head of operations. Would you read the highlighted section aloud? Morrison's face went pale as he read his own words. Continue operations at the West Virginia site regardless of EPA concerns. Legal says we can drag out any enforcement action for years, and the profit margins are too good to suspend production. Mr. Morrison, does continue operations regardless of EPA concerns sound like addressing environmental issues through proper channels?
The deposition continued for 8 hours. By the end, Morrison had admitted to knowingly violating federal environmental laws, authorizing illegal waste disposal, and ordering the cover-up of health studies that proved his company was poisoning communities. Similar depositions of other executives yielded equally damaging testimony. Blackstone's legal team had prepared their clients to deny everything, but they hadn't prepared them for Sterling's evidence. When confronted with their own emails, recordings, and internal documents, the executives had no choice but to admit their crimes. 6 months later, Judge Williams delivered her verdict. Blackstone Industries was found guilty of environmental crimes, fraud, conspiracy, and systematic rights violations. The financial settlement alone exceeded $14 billion, the largest environmental judgment in American history. But the criminal referrals were more important than the money. James Morrison and 6 other Blackstone executives were indicted on federal charges including conspiracy, environmental terrorism, and reckless endangerment. For the first time in decades, corporate executives would face prison sentences for environmental crimes. I stood outside the federal courthouse in Seattle, surrounded by reporters and cameras. The same people who'd ignored my applications for jobs and apartments now wanted to know my thoughts on corporate accountability and environmental justice. This isn't about revenge, I told them. It's about proving that no corporation is too powerful to face consequences for murdering innocent people. My grandmother spent 18 years documenting these crimes because she believed in a simple principle: justice delayed is justice denied. The financial settlement allowed us to establish the Dorothy Thompson Foundation for Environmental Justice, an organization dedicated to investigating corporate environmental crimes and supporting communities fighting contamination. Dr. Chen became our chief scientific officer, Miguel Santos headed our community outreach program. Victims became advocates, using their experiences to protect other families from corporate poisoning. Blackstone Industries filed for bankruptcy within a year, its stock price collapsing as the criminal trials revealed the full scope of their environmental crimes. Their assets were sold to pay victim compensation, and their executives began serving federal prison sentences ranging from 8 to 25 years. But the real victory wasn't destroying one corrupt company. It was proving that ordinary people could hold extraordinary power accountable. Our case became a template for environmental justice lawsuits across the country. Corporate executives finally faced real consequences for environmental crimes. I moved out of the studio apartment above the Vietnamese restaurant and into Dorothy's old house, which I'd bought back from the developers. I converted the basement, the room Dorothy had always kept locked, into an office where I could continue her work. On quiet evenings, I'd sit in her favorite armchair and read the letters she'd left me, understanding finally the weight of the choice she'd given me. She could have told me the truth earlier, could have given me an easier path. Instead, she taught me something more valuable, that true power isn't about what you own, but what you're willing to sacrifice to protect others. They told me I'd never own anything,
But in the end, I owned something more valuable than property or money. I owned the knowledge that justice, however delayed, is always worth fighting for. And sometimes, just sometimes, the little guy wins. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.